Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Scrutiny and Performance Committee of Perth and Kinross Council of Wednesday, the 12th of June 2024. We have got some substantial items of business on the agenda today, and the following committee, Finance and Resources, has already been put back half an hour to 1:30. So I do want to I do want to just make sure that we don't limit scrutiny, but if we can do that in as concise a manner when questioning and answering, that would be much appreciated, just so that we can keep to time throughout the day. Clerk, are there any apologies or substitutions?
Morning, members. Yes, we have an apology from Councillor Shires with Bailey Ahern substituting, and an apology from Councillor Massey with Councillor McPherson substituting. Can I just check those joining online that they've got into the meeting successfully? Do we have Councillor Forbes?
Yes, good morning, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Frampton?
I'm here.
And Councillor Robertson?
Good morning, I'm here as well.
Thank you. All members are present, convener.
Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda then is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest in items on the agenda today? No? Okay. Item 3 then is the minute of the meeting of Scrutiny and Performance Committee of 24th of April. Can we agree the minute of the last meeting? Thank you very much. Item 4 on the agenda is the outstanding business statement. First item there was that an interim report summarising the findings, actions taken and lessons learnt from the severe weather events of last year be submitted to committee, and we have that on the agenda today. Item 2 was that a list of dates when schools in Perth and Kinross were last inspected to be shared with members, and an email response was submitted. And item 3 was an update from the Primary Care Premises Strategy Group on the timescales of temporary arrangements of the CARS medical practice to be shared with members. That's not marked as completed, but that was circulated. So can we agree to that all of the items are complete and can be removed from the outstanding business statement? Bailey Ahern.
Thank you. I've got a question in the chat. I don't understand the completion of the first item in there, which is the Weather Events Improvement Plan. We have an interim report, which means it's not completed. We haven't spoken yet to the partners that are involved in that. That's going to be September. So to me, there is still a substantial outstanding action on that to see a final report. I'm also meeting with residents tonight who said that they're not completely happy with it. So I don't know what that's going to be. So I can't comment on that in this meeting because it's tonight. But for me, that is not a completed action.
Okay, thanks, Bailey Ahern. We recognised at the last meeting that we still have to meet with the partners that you refer to, so SSE, Scottish Water and SEPA. They were unable to be present at the committee before September, and they are scheduled to come to the September meeting of the committee. A request was made at the last meeting that there should be an interim report, and that's what's on the agenda. It's the interim report action that has been completed today.
So there should be another action on there with regards to those weather events, because that event is not completed yet. So there still needs to be an outstanding action for this committee.
So we recognise that we have an open action or an open, an ongoing situation where we have to speak to the partners at the next committee meeting. We have, since the last meeting, obviously held the tour of the flood defence system for members of the committee, in fact, for all elected members. So those issues are ongoing. We can add it as an action to the outstanding business statement if you want, but it is on the agenda it is on the sort of forward planning for the committee anyway.
Yeah, I would like to see it on there, and I know it's going to be tight, but I would like to see an outstanding action done by October, which may be quite tight because that's a year from the event. And I think a year on, we should be having a substantial answer to the questions that have been asked.
Okay, I recognise that we would all have, and all members on the committee expressed this, we would all have appreciated having the opportunity to sit down and have that discussion with the partners before September, when the first event was last October. We've all recognised that. We can add an action if the committee is agreeable to the outstanding business statement to continue the investigations, but we, as I say, we do have it on the forward planner for the committee anyway. Other members? Okay, we'll add that as an action point. Clark, thank you very much. That being said, those existing actions, can we agree that they're all completed and removed from the outstanding business statement? Agreed. Thank you very much. We'll then move on to the update by our arm's length external organisations. Just spelling that out because people will no doubt refer to ALIOs for the rest of the meeting. We have representatives, the chair and chief executive, I think, of each, of Culture, Perth and Kinross, Live Active Leisure and Perth Theatre and Concert Hall. Previously circulated to members of the committee, we've asked the three ALIOs to submit a short written report and their management accounts, and those have been circulated, and hopefully members have had a chance to catch up with those. But we've got, sorry,
I've not seen any.
I think they probably landed with Councillor Shires rather than yourself, but we can certainly get that forwarded on just now. And Councillor Allen's also looking bemused. Should be dated I think it was the 7th of June. Last Friday. Came from Miss Molly. Okay, I think it has been circulated, but we'll forward it on again. Each of the three ALIOs were asked to prepare a small slide presentation, but Karen, are you going to do an introduction briefly before we hear and ask for the presentations from the three ALIOs? So Karen Johnson, please.
Yes, thank you, convener, and good morning, councillors. So all three ALIOs are represented here this morning, with Helen Smout, Chief Executive, and Charles Cannell, Chair of Culture, Perth and Kinross, Paul Cromwell, Chief Executive, and David McLehose, Chair of Live Active Leisure, and Christopher Glasgow, Chief Executive, and Vanessa Rawlings-Jackson, the new Chair at the Perth Theatre and Concert Hall. All three organisations, as noted, have provided committee members with written reports focusing on the following: the key risks and issues identified in their recently submitted annual governance statements and their plans to address these, the discussions that are underway to implement the ALIO Transformation Review recommendations that were approved at Council in December 2023, and their latest financial positions. In addition to this, Culture, Perth and Kinross will provide an update on the progress of the new Perth Museum. Live Active Leisure will give an update on their transition planning regarding their exit from Bell Sports Centre at the end of August 2024. And Perth Theatre and Concert Hall will provide an update on the progress of the Perthshire box office and an example of the projects they have underway in our local schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Johnson. I'm not sure which of the ALIOs we've got up first. The slides. Culture, Perth and Kinross. I think you're up first with your slides. If we could move over to the slides, and Helen, I presume you'll be introducing them. Thank you.
Thank you, convener, and thank you very much to the committee for the opportunity to give this update today. It's been a very busy period, as you might imagine, since we last spoke here at the committee. I'm going to give you a very brief update on the museum and where its performance to date, where we're at with that, and happy to take any questions. We have received overwhelmingly positive feedback on the museum itself, not just locally from the many visitors from Perth and Kinross who've been visiting, but from partners, press, media and visitors from across the UK and internationally. Increasingly, we're being asked for international press visits. We've hosted ones from Germany, Spain, Austria, and most recently from North America Press Association. So this is a momentum which we are keen to continue to build on as we go forward. We opened on the 30th of March this year, so we've been open for just a little over 2 months. I'm going to share some figures around the museum for you, and I do so with some caution to say that we are only 2 months into the opening of this, and it's going to take us a year or more to see what normal looks like. However, if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So at the time of writing the slide, 76,000 visits. Actually, by the end of yesterday, we had over 83,000 visits to the museum. That's tracking twice where we thought we would be at this point in the year. And again, I think is in part down to that exceptional coverage and having been picked up, particularly by the Press Association. So we literally were in every single local newspaper across England and Wales. I spoke to a couple who came from Swindon because they came to see what all the fuss was about. They had seen it in their local newspaper, it had been on their local TV news, they'd seen it on the BBC news, and now they want to come back and move here. They just love the city. So people are rediscovering Perth, which is fantastic. Around 21% of people who come through the door are going to see the Stone of Destiny. And many more are also coming to see, about 5,000 come to see the Unicorn exhibition. We have school visits, we have coach party tours, we have community groups, we have heritage groups, we have small tour operators coming into the building. And around 23% of those are using our cafe facility. Overall, the spend per head at the museum is around £2.40 per head, which is where we had hoped it would be per the business case. We've seen an uplift also at Perth Art Gallery of around 31%, and St John's Kirk have welcomed 132% more visitors through their doors since we've opened. So we are beginning to have that wider impact on the city, but as I say, it's early doors. We're bringing the visitors in, and now we need to all work together to respond to that. We were successful in achieving a 5-star Visit Scotland rating for the building, but we also got accreditation for Taste Our Best, which is the quality assurance scheme for food and drink offering in there as well. So this is a work in progress. As with any large and complex building, we've got some snagging to do. Members of the public have been very generous in pointing out if we've managed to get the name of something wrong on a label, or if there's perhaps something that needs to improve. We're working further on things like the accessibility, the translations of texts and exhibits into other languages. We're redoing our guidebook to include other languages within that as well. And we're looking at online audio tours as well, which can be used by people's smartphones, so they don't need to worry about having headphones or headsets and things as they go around the museum. We've had a lot of school visits, and we continue to engage with schools across the region as part of the project. We're working with 10 partner schools, and we're working with them over a 3-year period funded by the Ganachie Trust. And that's to do some really deep engagement work with school pupils across the year groups, engaging them with the history and the heritage very much of their local area and the immediate area surrounding their schools, as well as how that fits into the wider history of Perthshire and indeed of Scotland. So lots of really exciting engagement projects. One of those was working with Fairview School, who had a takeover day. Their takeover day was actually at the art gallery. We'd worked with the pupils over a number of months to look at different jobs and roles and things that they too could do within a museum. And that was a really lovely day. They designed their own uniforms, working with the YMCA. They designed their own activities. They took over the tours. They met the public. They had them around. So it was a fantastic opportunity. And that kind of work is what we will be continuing to do. If I could have the next slide, please. In terms of engagement, we've been quite deliberately focusing on the opening of the actual museum itself the first few months. So we haven't had a lot of additional events at the museum itself. However, those are now beginning to come into place. We wanted first to make sure that we were getting it right on a daily basis and the visitors were having the best experience they could. So we do now have walking tours, which start and finish at the museum, but go around the city centre. We do a Jacobite tour and a medieval tour. We also have highlight tours every Thursday and every Sunday that people can drop into to be shown around the museum. And we have a programme of events which are now beginning. Our first talk, which is an internationally renowned curator coming over from the Met in New York to talk about unicorns, which is their specialist subject. So they're delighted we're doing that exhibition. That takes place at the end of June. Tickets are available online. And that programme of offering continual opportunities for people to come back, reasons to revisit. Our next exhibition, Unicorn, finishes in September, and we have a further exhibition that will start in September. So it's not just about the permanent exhibitions, it's about the programming, the events, the activity, the engagement within communities. All of that is designed to build the audience and retain them and to keep the revisitation of them there. We also continue to work with travel trade and others to ensure that particularly over winter months, we're getting coach parties, tour parties. And we've been very lucky in that the Coach Tourism Association particular is a very big supporter. They're very keen on Perth as a location. So we're getting a lot of coach party bookings, including around Christmas and New Year. People are looking to do something different and to have new experiences beyond the Central Belt. So we're capitalising on that as much as possible. If I could have the next slide, please. So some of our next steps, we've not really had much time to rest on our laurels. This is a continuous process for us. The museum is not just about the opening or the first few months or the first year. This is a museum in a building that's going to be there for decades, and we have to work on it on that basis. So it's a process of continual improvement, a regeneration, renewal, if you like, of exhibitions, of content, of display. So just listed on the slide, I'll not go through them all, but these are some of the activities that the team are now engaged in. We continue to promote Perth Art Gallery as well, and we do that as a kind of sister venue. And as I say, we've seen an uplift in activity there. Once we get our temporary exhibition programming back up and running following the redevelopment of two of the galleries at the art gallery, then we're hoping to see further improvement over the summer. There's a lot there, and our staff have been working really hard on this. We've got an exceptional team, and I don't say that lightly. They really are very, very talented and very admired across the UK. But it's important that we continue to support them with development opportunities, with training opportunities, and that we ourselves tell the story of what we've done here in Perth. We haven't done it on our own. This has been an absolute collaborative project of which the council was the major partner. But the story of what we've achieved in Perth and what the museum has achieved is quite extraordinary. So we are looking at showcase opportunities. We are speaking at conferences, both national and international. We are telling that story of how we've reinvented what a local museum and a local museum can do. And there is huge interest in that. So I think that's something that everybody in Perth should be really proud of, because we have done something special. So I'm happy to take any questions, and the next slide, if you're not already following us on social media, just gives you all the places to look. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we do have a few questions which would be Culture, Perth and Kinross specific. So before we move on to all of the slides, we'll take the ones that are in the chat already. And first up is Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Helen. Thank you for your presentation. I was lucky enough to come along to the opening and enjoyed my time there. From your slides, I did have a couple of questions, but I'll ask my first one anyway. From your presentation there, I don't know if I've misunderstood you, but you've suggested there were 83,000 visits as of yesterday. And did I pick you up right saying that only 21% of these people see the Stone of Destiny?
Yes, that's right. In terms of the Stone of Destiny experience is a timed experience, so there are only so many tickets and visitors that we can get through. But many of the visitors, it's not the Stone of Destiny that's the driver to come to the museum, it's a part of the visit. But for many people, it's the wider collections, it's understanding Perth and the story of Perth, of which the stone is obviously an important part. But they're coming because this is a museum that tells the story of the region, and that's a really important driver as well. So we always knew from the business case that this stone would be an important part of the story, but it wouldn't be the main driver on its own, and that it would maybe take away around 20,000 visitors from Edinburgh. But actually we've got a very strong story of which that's part, and that's actually what's bringing a lot of people through the doors.
Thank you for that. And yeah, I do understand, given how long it took me to get in and have my time in front of the stone itself. I would imagine that that probably presents some disappointment from some of your visitors. The only thing I wanted to add is the photograph that you had up there of the Stone of Destiny was far better than the recollection I had. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Allen. Councillor Forbes online.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Councillor Allen asked exactly the same question I was going to ask, but I've got my second one here, so I'll just go straight to that one. Helen, thanks for all of that information. I visited the museum a couple of weeks ago, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I ate some lunch in the cafe, and I thought the food was excellent. The prices were reasonable. The staff were really friendly. I'm just wondering if it's had any detrimental or indeed perhaps positive effect on other small businesses round about the site of the museum.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. At the moment, I've seen some uplift in terms of the actual detail of those businesses. I wouldn't have the detail of that, but certainly the footfall in the city centre has increased, and we know anecdotally that a number of businesses have said that they have seen more people through their doors. Now, it will change over time. As I say, we're very early in terms of operations, but around 23% of visitors to the museum are passing through our cafe, which means that over 75% are going somewhere else to have a drink or to wander around the city or whatever. So I would hope that affect some businesses, that will just take some time to trickle through, but in terms of exact details with individual businesses, that's not something I have at this time. But we are working with Emily McQueen and Suzanne Kaminsky in the Economic Development Department quite closely to track that over time. So hopefully we'll have more information at the far end of the summer.
Great, thank you.
And next is Councillor Frampton online.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks, Helen, for the presentation. I've been a few times to the museum now with friends from Ireland to show them around, and they've loved the experience. The question I wanted to ask was, in the old museum, there was a children's section where small children could colour in and things like that. I keep getting asked this over and over. Is there any plan to have a children's section in the new museum? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. What we've done with the museum is that children's activities are integrated throughout the displays. So there's a lot of digital interactivity. There are activities that children can do in amongst the display to maximise their engagement with the content. We do also have within the unicorn exhibition, there's a play area there that children can engage and colour in, and their pictures are up on the wall. We will work to provide content for children, but we'll do that on a different basis each time. We have a dedicated gallery for children at the Perth Art Gallery, and that's really successful. And what we don't want to do is dilute that experience by kind of competing with ourselves, if you like, internally. But we are increasing the number of opportunities with children, and over time we will change those. So as the exhibits change, as the exhibition contents change, the interactives, if you like, for children and for young people, and indeed older people who quite often like them too, will change and engage. And some of our exhibitions are very much, some of the displays rather, are very much targeted at children. So our Wild and Wonderful exhibition, we do struggle sometimes to get children to leave at the end of the day because they like engaging with all the birds and the noises and the animals. But as I say, it's something that we continue to develop and grow, and we're very mindful of our younger customers.
Thank you.
And the next question from Vice Convener Bailey.
Thank you very much, Convener. It's continuing to really pull on a thread that I think Councillor Forbes started to pull a moment ago with his question about the cafe business case. The third bullet on the second from last slide says that there'll be a review of the retail and cafe business case. Could you tell us a bit about that? Might that include options for private sector involvement to return to that? Thank you, Helen.
Yes, thank you. We absolutely will review all of that within the business case. At this stage, what we're looking at is the actual performance and reviewing that. We've always said that we would look to review fully the operating model after 2 years, when we would have data and we would actually have all of the facts, if you like, so that if we did decide to go out to market, we were doing that from a very informed position. As I say, the performance that we have just now is not the performance over a year, and potentially, you know, we could make predictions that might not be accurate. We are looking at how we might engage with local business. So when we've had events, we've used Perth Gin. Part of the Taste Award is the accreditation for using local suppliers, which means that within our cafe, we're using local suppliers for the food and for the coffee in particular, the bean shop, but we've got lots of other local suppliers as well. So wherever possible, we're trying to give the opportunity to local business so that they are engaged with what we're doing and that they're benefiting from having the cafe there, even if they're not quite directly providing that opportunity itself. But it is something that we would look at in the longer term.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much, Convener. This is a strange one. I maybe use your microphone. Helen, thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you very much for last night, which was very good. Could you just tell me a wee bit more about the translation situation regarding overseas visitors? Are they getting the opportunity to understand everything if you're coming along and you don't speak English, or was that something that was missed out? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's a good one. So at the moment, all our interactives are in other languages, so people can use all the digital content and get the deeper content in other languages. We're working on, as I mentioned, the Smartify app, which also has different languages. We do have content that is translated. We didn't have it all in place at the opening. And that was in part a problem with our suppliers and our printers, but we do have the translations now. So those are in key languages. However, what's been really key is we've been working with travel trade as well. So working with them means that we know when groups are coming in, either with a translator or a tour guide, or if we need to do that or look at that ourselves. So we've been trying to do it on a case-by-case basis. Work in progress, and there's definitely more that we need to do, but we are continuing to do that work just now.
Councillor Welch, I'll come to you for your first question.
Thank you, Helen, for the presentation. I think it must be extremely encouraging for you to see this early success, and it should not be underestimated. The huge challenges to build a new facility and to from a museum perspective curate it and launch it so successfully. So I think well done to yourself and your teams. I think this is going to be an iconic building and a facility in the centre of Perth, and should deliver significant economic benefits, ongoing benefits to Perth City. My question is, in terms of the business case and the wider economic benefit, how are you looking to sort of capture that so that ultimately we can understand the direction of travel and its impact and influence on other elements within the city and across some of the other alleys as well, so that effectively you're able to demonstrate the full impact in the longer term? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It is one of these things that we need to gather the data and the evidence as we go. We are working very closely, as I say, with the team, the economic development team, who hold a lot of the data and the broader data outside the museum, which we don't necessarily collect ourselves, but it's about using that information, tracking the information against the KPIs and the targets, reviewing those KPIs and targets where we think we're actually tracking ahead of those. In terms of engagement, particularly with the other ALIOs, myself, Chris and Paul meet on a very regular basis in terms of sharing the detail of what we're doing. We're looking at the shared work that we can do together and how we can maximise the benefit and the opportunity, not just of what we've done at the museum, but of all the great work that's being done in terms of programming development at the theatre, the concert hall, and what Live Up to Leisure they're doing. So I think, obviously, with the Tay City deal angle, there is a lot of scrutiny on that data, and there will be a lot of reporting that is required around that, and that will be there for some time. So as we progress and as we go over time, I would hope that we can give much more detailed reports about that wider impact, both to this committee and to the funders who've been involved in the project. At this stage, though, we're still just a little bit early in to see those longer term impacts.
Thank you for your answer, and indeed exciting times ahead for you and the other ALIO groups as well. Thank you.
Thanks. And a second question from Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener. It's just really to talk about the gap with regards to finance. On your main presentation there, you spoke about venue hire. I just wonder if you can just elaborate a wee bit on that and how you think that might help. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a fantastic building at the museum, which is of interest to corporate hires and other hires, wedding venues, etc. However, we do operate it at the moment 7 days a week, 9 till 5 as a visitor attraction. So what we can do with venue hire and how we can do make that work is limited in some regard by the operation. However, there are a lot of corporate opportunities there. The event that your colleague alluded to yesterday was the first of our corporate hires. Yesterday evening, we had Booking.com in presenting an award to Councillor Lane and the chair of the Perthshire Tourism Partnership for Perth being the most welcoming place on earth, which is a very interesting title for an award. But that kind of interest, we are receiving a lot of interest around it. So what we need to look at with the venue hire is how we can make that work. We've deliberately been doing some events like the Booking.com event, where developed a wedding brochure and other things, and we're testing everything now. What works? How fast can we turn things around? How many seats can we get in a space? What can we do if we've got this exhibition on and that exhibition on? Some of these things we can plan before we opened, but until we're actually opened and we know how far away from the logboat you can put a seat if somebody's going to be sitting in it for an event, that kind of thing we're working through now. So the review of that venue hire and pushing the opportunities of that venue hire is something we're working quite hard on. But we've definitely got a market there, I think, for a building. People want to have a beautiful backdrop to their event, and we have that in that building.
Thank you. That's all of the specific questions at the moment, but I have some around the annual governance statement and the transformation plans, but I'll pick them up for all of the ALIOs afterwards. So we'll move on now to, who's next? Live Active Leisure. I think Paul Cromwell, Chief Executive, is going to introduce the slides, if we can get them on screen. Over to you, Paul.
Okay, thank you, Convener. Morning, councillors. Thank you again for the invitation to attend Scrutiny Committee this morning. I will provide a brief overview of the progress that has been made in relation to the Perth transition planning work, which is currently underway. If I could have next slide, please. The next one again, please. So there's obviously a fair number of work streams in flow at this time, which I'll go through. Staff teams, obviously an absolute priority to the organisation in terms of the impact that the closure of Bells and the transition has on them. In terms of impact, it's 19 staff, equal to 14 FTE. Engagement, ongoing support and formal consultation has started with the team of staff. As part of our workforce change planning, we were able to manage vacancies leading up to this project and the project starting point, and therefore we are in a positive position in relation to providing opportunities for this team. Obviously, there's some retraining challenges there, and we require flexibility of the staff. But in terms of the wider opportunities we have, it's looking quite positive at the moment. So that engagement is continuing. In terms of Bells Sports Centre, obviously there's decommissioning arrangements to put in place there. We have to prepare for the handover to Perth and Kinross Council. So we are working extremely closely with the PKC Property Department. And besides that, we're also liaising closely with Perthshire Rugby Club, who everybody will know are obviously based at that site and on the North Inch. And therefore it's absolutely integral that communications are clear in terms of the rugby club and their future arrangements at the site, and these are ongoing. Beyond that, we're looking at decommissioning arrangements in terms of contracts, assets, equipment, and anything else that we can upcycle that we can use at Dewars. Then we're obviously looking at every opportunity for us to do that. In terms of Dewars, and again, just to reiterate, what we're developing there is a health and fitness offer, which includes fitness gym, studios, and access and changing room improvements. We have also developed, as you would imagine, a revised staffing structure, which has been developed over the course of the last period, with the aim to ensure that it develops and delivers a service requirements of the new and existing facilities, but also one that is integrated with Perth Leisure Pool. And this integration is obviously there to make sure that we can build resilience and flexibility going forward, which will certainly be needed. I think probably all of us are still facing some recruitment challenges, so therefore building in flexibility and resilience as we move forward for our key sites is absolutely paramount. And of course, it will also help in terms of the preparation for decisions and the delivery of PH2O as we move forward. Next slide, please. In terms of physical changes to Dewars, there's obviously a number of areas that we're looking at in terms of developing the building. And technical specification and drawings have been developed. We've gone through tender processes, building warrant applications submitted as there are change of use in terms of some of the spaces. And we have already procured the fitness equipment, which will have delivery. So we're expecting now, in terms of the overall project, a commencement date in around September, the beginning of September. In terms of Perth City Sports Hall allocation, this is a large project, so what we're trying to do here is work strategically with our colleagues in the council around the wider sporting estate in Perth City. So the project team is comprised of ourselves and council officers. there's been an extremely comprehensive audit completed in terms of available sports spaces. And when I say sports spaces, it's beyond courts, because again, we're really trying to think out of the box here in terms of how we maximise all the spaces as well as courts that we have across the estate. So that audit's been completed. We've had to talk closely about how do we work differently going forward. We are two separate organisations, so it's back to talking about how we work together between the family group, not only with the ALIOs but also with the council. So we've looked at harmonising terms and conditions, prioritisation allocations, and how we actually do map strategically sports provision across the city. So this work is ongoing. Over the period, we've developed an online booking process between us, which has now been rolled out. If we can go to the next slide, please. And our focus now is obviously on the next winter season. So with the flood happening last October and impacting Bells, then the actual winter season, which is the main sports season for sports halls, had already commenced. So therefore, the opportunities to actually try and relocate activities was difficult as the mapping was already completed. We've now got the opportunity, obviously, in terms of having a look at that for the next winter. And that's the process that we're currently going through. So the online form has gone out. We've contacted every group directly. We've publicised it and promoted it on the council and LAO websites. It's been received well. So that's out in terms of requesting information from all the clubs and organisations and asking them for flexibility in terms of space, time, and what they require to deliver their activity. The booking window for this will close on the 23rd of June and allocations will be confirmed by the 22nd of July. So there's a window there of a few weeks, which is where obviously our teams now need to sit down and determine exactly how we use that space to the best advantage of everybody and do that in a fair way. Alongside clubs, we also need to look at what does this look like from a casual activity space, so less formal. There's still a requirement there for us to try and provide opportunities for people to engage in non-formal sport and activity. So that will also form part of the process. So a good bit of work done and a good bit still to do in terms of what this looks like for the next few years in terms of sports hall provision in Perth. Going forward, and as I've mentioned, we need to work together in terms of how we look at a single booking system across the estate. Principles of this have been discussed as part of the sports strategy. It's an action within that, and it remains an action that partners have agreed to in terms of what the principles look like, and that's something that we will roll out. But the priority at the moment is the actual Perth City allocation and mapping. In terms of communication engagement plans across all these different streams, and obviously there's different messages that we're sending out to different people. So these plans are in place as we move the project forward towards the end of August and the start of September. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much for the presentation. Have we got any questions from members? Bailey Hearn.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Paul, for the presentation. My question is on, I think, 2 slides back about the Dewar Centre improvements and additional building works. And I wonder whether any of these are emergency works that are required, or are they operational works to facilitate the change of use of the halls? And are these planned as long term? The concern is that you'll be doing works and spending money out on works that may be superseded by PH2O if and when that comes on. And is that a good use of spending if that's the case?
Thank you for the question. So we've built into the model in terms of spend a budget, and there's a return on investment of 3 years in terms of that investment. So we're obviously aware that of sensitivity around the spend, particularly if PH2O is going to come online. So, fundamentally that we all wish to avoid abortive spend and make sure that we're maximising the investments that we have. So the work that we're doing is not only obviously we're having to purchase new equipment, there's some physical changes we need to do to the actual spaces to develop the studios and the gym hall. So some of the, like as I mentioned, some of the equipment and we will be using from Bell Sports Centre. In other words, we can transfer it where that's cost efficient to do it. Beyond that, what we're having to look at is some additional improvements to changing room facilities to make sure that we can accommodate the significantly increased numbers that will be attending Dewars. And it's principally around those areas that we're looking at, but it's been built into the business and the budget case in terms of a return on investment, even with that spend over the next 3 years.
Thank you. Councillor Welch.
Thank you, Peter, for your presentation. And again, as another, you've had a significant challenge over the last 12 months in moving into a sort of crisis management mode, and it's to be applauded as to some of the steps you've taken to do that. As a member of one of the clubs that was impacted by the issue at Bells, and essentially now accessing and using Perth and Kinross facilities in schools, which generally are of very high quality. Some of the challenges have been around access and booking, and getting effectively a consistency of booking that so that clubs can have a reliable slot. Obviously, you talked about developing this and mapping it going forward for this winter. How are you finding that process, and with the different nature of the clubs, are you working cooperatively and collaboratively with them?
We are. Obviously, in terms of engagement, the online form now is asking clubs for a huge amount of detail. So we've ourselves and the council work together here to develop this online form for the winter season. That is asking that, so that not only is it just giving everybody a clear understanding of the challenge we have, but also the opportunities we have and how we're trying to do this differently to make sure that we do everything we can for clubs. So that online form is asking for a huge amount of information from clubs, and a lot of that is built around also about flexibility. So if you previously used a centre, it'll be a different centre going forward somewhere else in Perth City if we feel that there's an opportunity for us. That has an impact in terms of how we best use the facilities and spaces we have. So that engagement is ongoing right now. The next part is the cut-off point from that, and us actually sitting down and understanding clearly what we have. We understand now what we have as a resource, so we know that. So the next part is what's everybody's requirements for the winter, and how does that best fit across the wider public estate. During that process, I would imagine that, yes, we will absolutely be engaging with clubs. There'll be discussions that we need to have to try and make sure that we're operating and delivering this as flexibly as we possibly can. As I mentioned, the challenge we've had over the winter is the winter bookings were already put in place for the season 23-24. So therefore, the arrangements that we've managed to put in place since Bells was impacted in October have been temporary arrangements. What we're trying to get to now is actually we have a plan in place, and that's something that clubs need consistency. They need a weekly booking. That's what this process hopefully will be able to deliver us on.
Thank you for that reply. If there's anything that you feel can be done within the councillors to help you engage in some of those, sort of, for example, silos in terms of accessing school facilities, please let us know, and if we can help unlock that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would say, officers are working really closely on this, and completely looking at this from a new perspective and understanding, like I said, it's not just about courts, it's about how other spaces can be used, which can maybe displace, you can move other activities. So I have to say, as a team, officers and LAL officers are working really proactively and really positively in terms of trying to get us to a positive place in terms of the winter season.
That's really encouraging to hear. Thank you.
Thanks, and I might just exert convener's privilege here before the next question, just to follow up on that point. I know we're talking about Perth City, but to use an analogy, when the user reference group was up and running for the Blairgowrie Recreation Centre, some of the feedback that I got as a neighbouring ward member was that individuals who were using the gyms and classes were not engaged in the sort of consultation user reference process in the same way. So a lot of what you've talked about in terms of the Perth City allocations is about contacting the clubs, the standing clubs who want to make block bookings. But what about engagement with people who use classes and fitness equipment and so on, and being able to engage in that same process with individuals rather than clubs?
Yes, thanks, convener. Yes, We communicated initially with those clubs who were directly impacted, so we did prioritise them. We felt that in terms of having that discussion, that then obviously those people, particularly those that were negatively impacted, we spoke to them first. But within the same period, matter of days, then we engaged in terms of the more positive news, which is, as you say, for fitness and classes. Then what we're actually developing is a new offer, a new exciting offer at Dewars. So that communication went out, although we did make that decision, as I say, to communicate with those clubs directly impacted first. But yes, we obviously there's been a compromise for our classes and our gym users over this period, many of which have stayed loyal to us. We've managed to provide an alternative class program between the spaces that we've had at Dewars and the spaces that were still available to us at Bell Sports Centre. But yes, customers were delighted to hear that actually the facilities that we enjoyed at Bell Sports Centre were going to re-emerge at Dewars. And you're right, in terms of other facilities outside of Perth, there's conversations there, and we will have to, in terms of some of the sports we have, we don't have those facilities in Perth, so we will also be having to look at how we provide capacity elsewhere across P&K in other areas. So the wider programming is also part of it, although the focus obviously is on Perth City at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Robertson online.
Thanks, convener. Unfortunately, my camera's not working, so you can't see me. Paul, I think we all appreciate what a tough job you've got over the last few months, and appreciate the work you're doing. Can I ask you about if there's been any consideration given to what could be the Bell Sports Centre could be used for in future? Like, for example, an all-weather tennis facility or sports facility that. Or have you any thoughts at all of what it can be used for? It's an asset which I think we should, in going forward, try and find some use for. Thank you.
I don't know if you want to come in, but this might be a question for council officers as well. But Mr. Cromwell, if there's anything you want to say first of all, otherwise I'll go to.
I'm happy for that to go to council officers. Thank you.
Claire Mailer, please.
There we go. Apologies about that. Yes, thank you for the question. I don't think Stephen Crawford, our head strategic lead for property services, on the call, but what can advise committee is that considerations are currently underway in terms of the future of Bell Sports Centre. Committee members will be aware that we are bringing the PH2O report, plans and proposals to full council in August of this year, and I would anticipate that within that report we will have a bit of a steer in terms of the future of Bells.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next question from Councillor Allen.
Yeah, thank you, convener, and thank you, Paul, for your presentation. I feel a wee bit gazumped because I think Mr. Robertson just asked half of my question there. With regards to transition actions, there are currently many sports facilities and functions that take place at Bells. How are we actually helping the groups that are going to be displaced to move into other areas? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, what we're doing is working together to maximise the estate that we have and programme that in a different way. Programme that jointly with the council going forward across the whole school estate. So whether that's LAL facilities, the campuses, the high schools, the primary schools. So in terms of that wider estate, the audit's been completed in terms of understanding clearly what that looks like from every way possible. What we need to do now is, and we've already started, is engage with the clubs to be really clear about what facilities, times, sport and equipment requirements they have, what flexibility they have to operate on different days, times, weekends. And then what we need to do is, once we've got that deadline in place, is we need to sit down and map that and engage with the clubs during that process to see what we can do to as I say, to maximise the public estate as much as we possibly can. So it's a different way of working. It's a different way of working, and we're asking that flexibility of the clubs as well. But so far, certainly, from the returns that we have, is people and clubs are engaging with us very positively.
Thank you for that. I know this may come back to officers as well, but Councillor Robertson's point about using the facility in a different way is a really good idea. I know for a fact that we don't have a facility such as an all-weather indoor football kind of arena. That would be certainly something that can be used for other sports as well. I just think that we need to engage in all activities and have thoughts above and beyond the borders we currently use. Thank you.
Thank you. And Bailey Ahern.
Thank you very much. And I'm going back to the building works and a current issue that we have with the Jewish Centre, and that's when we've got rain, half the car park underneath becomes unusable. And with the increase in numbers, are we doing anything to improve the use of the car park? We're not going to have to keep closing off areas of it when we get adverse weather.
Thank you for the question. It's obviously a challenge. As we know the history of that site, there are challenges there in terms of flood management. We have them there, although it tends to be, obviously, in history tells us that Perth Leisure Pool suffers more than Dewars does, but you're right in terms of the car park. So we've mitigated some flood measures. Will that have an impact on that car park? I'm not sure at this time. What we do have is our single biggest area of car park spaces. It's good for the city. It's a good location. It's actually got more car park spaces there than Bells does. We have controls in place to manage it so that it is principally for customers of those venues. So I think car park management, car parking is always an issue, but I think in terms of the range of facilities that we have at Dewars, the fact that it's hosted large scale events and large numbers, it's good for the train, it's good for the buses, it's good for cycling, good for walking. I think we're in the best position we possibly can be as an alternative to Bells in terms of that activity.
Thank you. And Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Convener. I know, Polly, you've had a hell of a year. It's a really bad one for you. Could you just make sure that when you move the to different facilities, that the people have the proper equipment that's there for them? There's lots of new sports, and you know what I'm going to talk about. It was disappointing that I asked about it quite some time ago, and there's still no the proper nets, etc., etc. So people will be disappointed that they're losing out in Bells, because you know Bells was the thing in Perth for sports. It was really the thing that we all wanted. Everybody's jumping on the bandwagon regarding my suggestion regarding an indoor facility in Bells. I'm getting this one saying it, this one saying it. To me, it's a no-brainer. It would be a brilliant scheme for Perth. But I just hope, as I said, that when you do have to accommodate all the other sports, and remember, there are always new sports coming round, that you do make sure that they're facilitated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, it's part of the planning. I mean, you're right in terms of equipment. So you've got to have the right equipment, you've got to have the right floor surfaces, and that's why us having a look at the sport and activity and mapping that against the facility. This isn't just about space, it's about the types of floor, and you're right, the types of equipment. Now, if we're bringing more equipment in, you're right, we also need to have that, but we also need to make sure we have storage. That storage needs to be accessible, and it needs to work on that site and that location, particularly if that site and location is a primary school that's not hitherto had this type of activity happening. So there's a lot of change there we're looking to put in place, but you're absolutely right. If you're doing it, we've got to make sure that the end product for the customer and the clubs is what it should be. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And I don't think we've got any more questions on that presentation. So we'll move on now to Perth Theatre and Concert Hall. Christopher Glasgow, Chief Executive, I think we'll be talking to the slides, but I'd like to just welcome Vanessa Rawlings-Jackson as Chair of Perth Theatre and Concert Hall to our first meeting of the committees. Welcome. Mr. Glasgow, over to you.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, everyone. Slides pending. Fortunately, I think you all have a copy of my full script for both sections, because I have been known to go off on a tangent, so you may as well read it in black and white whilst I go. If we could jump to the third slide, please. Perfect, thank you very much. So since launching in February, the Perthshire box office is continuing to go from strength to strength. It was great, with great pride, that the platform launched in collaboration with Culture Perth and Kinross for the opening of the new Perth Museum. and the Stone of Destiny. But also this is a really exciting moment because understandably over the past few months that has been really the key focus, which has been an exceptional learning for the team, but it's also created a momentum that I feel is really allowing the box office to start to come into its own with wider partnerships now being developed across Perth and Kinross. Most recently, we also added tours to the list with our wonderful partners, Scottish Model Engineering Trust. So the 17,030 tickets that we've sold since February, that includes the Stone of Destiny, and that's 32,000 tickets since the pilot period. I included some targets as well for the next 4 years that we did for our business plan, which was recently submitted to Creative Scotland, just to talk a wee bit about the nuance in those figures, because the figures do of course differ. That's because the figures for targets do not include the Stone of Destiny, because they would skew everything that we work towards. And a bit like Culture Perth and Kinross, there's still a settling period for us. It's also really important around the nuance of what's a free ticket versus a paid ticket and what actually is going to help us generate more income, not just for the benefit of ourselves, but actually for all the partners involved in the project. Given that for me particularly, the project was first and foremost about increasing accessibility across Perth and Kinross and for people coming to events from out with Perth and Kinross, I'm absolutely delighted that we've been shortlisted for Digital Difference at the SCVO Charity Awards, and that's specifically for the work that the project is doing to increase accessibility for ticketed events in the region. And on the back of that, we've been invited to the Creative Tech Gathering Scotland to deliver a panel on our work on the Perthshire box office. And I think speaking to that moment of accessibility and partnership working, what I was really touched by is actually our partners have been invited to participate in that panel too. So it's not just about the digital development, it's about the community that we're building. And for me, that is absolutely central to the project. So that's a really significant moment for us, with both the award and then the panel discussion coming up at the end of the month. Also related to accessibility, and I have to thank you, inspired by questions that came at our last scrutiny committee. In January, we spoke quite a bit about the cost of our rooms for conferencing and event hires, which at that time also included community room bookings. Since moving the entire staff base to Perth Theatre and freeing up wider space, it's allowed us to introduce a new booking system specifically for community groups across Perth and Kinross. And having the separate platform, what it's allowed us to do is just to tease out actually very different booking periods. So a conference or an orchestral concert, for example, is, booking at least 9 months in advance in order to be able to get the full service they require. But actually there are community groups across Perth and Kinross that literally just need a warm room with the lights on. Our buildings are open. We want to be a hub for the city centre. So it's a new booking process with a shorter lead-in time. And the agreement is you get the empty shell, and if you want anything more, come and speak to us and we can provide that depending on your needs and requirements. So the trial for that's going to launch this month, but it did actually informally begin last month with the Perth Business Association through our relationship with Perth Gin. Also really important on the accessibility front, but also the environmental focus of the organisation and indeed the council. Last year we were running quite a significant research project called Transforming Audience Travel Through Art, which again was building another data set about our audiences, how they get to our venues and how they're travelling around Perth and what challenges they're facing. I did include a link to the report that's been published by Creative Carbon Scotland and the report that you've received should anyone wish to read that. But the recommendations and what has always actually been the dream for part of this project is to actually embed travel booking within the Perthshire box office and to trial that as a new Perth Theatre bus service, which we have already started, again, tentatively behind the scenes with Glenfarg Community Transport. And then the last one is the development of an online shop called PBO Plus. It speaks very much to my own digital interests, but more importantly, again, it's all about the organisation's focus on accessibility. And where that began was actually our care home partners. we work extensively with care homes, and there are people within those care homes who still want to engage with cultural product, but actually physically cannot come to events and venues. So we're working with an artist called The Grey Hill to build in an online shop of audio dramas this year, which will be made available to people who cannot otherwise access physical events. But longer term, we've secured funding as part of a UK Creative Catalyst grant in collaboration with The Grey Hill to bring on board Nick Hearn Books and Bloomsbury Publishing, which will make over 2,000 titles available for people to buy via Perthshire Box Office. They can also do that in a subscription model. So for example, if we wanted to do something that's specifically tied to our shows, they could have a series of products that they buy. It's also something that we hope will incentivize people who maybe, you know, are just checking it out, thinking what's going on, I'll listen to a book, but actually have an active interest. We can actually develop algorithms through this grant to start monitoring that behaviour and then pushing relevant live events. And then thinking more widely with our colleagues across Perth and Kinross, actually there's a real opportunity around other themed events to make wider product available for people to be able to download and listen to in advance of the project. If we could move on to the next slide, please, and our next area of focus. I won't go over the overview of all our work in schools over the past year, but I thought it was important to note because our work in schools takes on so many different forms and covers indeed all genres. But I specifically chose the Cool Collective because it was something I mentioned at last Scrutiny that was just launching. And I didn't realise just how significant it would come. And I had the pleasure 2 weeks ago of being invited by the young people to come and check what they were doing in the studio. And it was a really, really special moment. It's delivered in partnership with the Stanley Development Trust Counterculture Studios in Perth Grammar. There's been consistent participations across the project, so none of the young people have dropped out. It's been very much led and developed by them, and the focus on evaluation has been about equality between them and their tutors so that they feel that they have real ownership of the project. And for me, that's really important because actually what that project is doing is delivering a musical focus on subjects that are not taught so significantly as part of the music curriculum, so specifically DJing and actually the real art that exists in that. And that's really important from an employability point of view because actually it's giving people access via the charitable sector of the arts to actually the commercial side of the music making industry, which without these projects, it would be very difficult for them to get a foot in the door. Similarly, I've listed in the report many of the KPIs that have come out of our new theory of change evaluation framework, which is now rolling out across the entire organisation. But the reason, again, for me wanting to include this project is there are other benefits that are not included here because they're still being measured and why the theory of change is so important. And there are two specific examples that I would really like to cite for you today. One of the young people is Ukrainian, and he has created a rap about his experiences, and the rap is in his 3 languages, Ukrainian, Russian, and English. Where for me the impact gets really exciting, albeit difficult to measure, is we're actually working with a professional director who's developed app technology that allows people in live theatre performance to hear any play in their chosen language. We're now going to pair that young person with the director and look at how he one-to-one can apply that to his own music making. And that feels like a really special opportunity for me. Similarly, talking about entry to the creative sector, one of our young members of our operations team, that was his way to get into the sector, but actually his first love is music and he wants to be working in music. He is now the paid intern on that project and is the person teaching. And that for me is where it gets really exciting and important and demonstrates real targeted impact with schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the first question is from Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Chris. I just noticed from your slide there, you talk about the Perth Theatre bus service. At a time when companies like Stagecoach are pulling back on all services, I'd be really interested to know how that's going to work. I'm a councillor in the Strathallan ward, and I've got an entrepreneur who's trying to reopen a cinema there, and he's also talking about similar types of ventures. I just wonder what your ideas are, without obviously spending too much time on that, and perhaps I can meet you later on just to chat about it. Thank you.
Yes. So I can't remember if I spoke last time about what inspired this focus, which was actually the original Perth Theatre bus, which was funded by the community of Crieff. The slight difference for us this time is that we're wanting to take away that cost barrier for the communities that we're targeting. So as part of our work with Creative Carbon Scotland, we are actively applying for funding at the moment so that we can cover the costs of both the bus hire, but also contribute towards the tickets for the members of the public that want to engage. We have previously spoken with Stagecoach and have applied to their community grant scheme. The biggest challenge we're facing at the moment to do with the community transport providers is licensing, because there's a slight change in what they need to do. That lies with them, but we're working with them to help them through that process, and that was why we trialled it with Glenpark Community Transport, because they already have that in place. In terms of providing funded transport, I do think there is a model out there. It's a model that already exists for Perth Theatre and Concert Hall. So the Ganachie Trust, for example, specifically fund us through the Perth Concert Series to put on bus transport for Perth and Kinross schools. So there is a model there. We're just taking our time to find the best funding stream to enable it to happen.
Thank you. Bailey Hart.
Thank you very much. Can I first start off saying a huge thank you for having a look at the room charges, and especially for the communities. It's something I've been going on for a long time, and we finally got there. So thanks very much for that. With regards to my question, mine's also on the theatre bus service, and Councillor Allen asked part of my question, but I suppose I'll change it slightly in the fact that the huge disastrous changes that came in from Stagecoach is affecting not just rural areas, but parts of the city centre, and unable to have good access into the city centre in the evening, especially trying to get home. And have you been able to measure yet whether that's had an effect on events you're putting on in the evening? Because it's going to affect the likes of yourself, the pubs, the restaurants, the cinema. I don't know whether it's too early at the moment to sort of count whether that's had an impact.
At the moment, in terms of our indications in the data, it's not had an impact, and the reason for that is a bit of a full circle moment. So the reason that this whole project, Transforming Audience Travel, came about is because consistently year on year since reopening, 82% of our audiences have had to use a car in order to be able to come to our venues. And the reason Creative Carbon Scotland approached us, because actually our biggest source of carbon emissions as an organisation is our audiences and the travel. So at the moment that stayed pretty stable at 82%, but we're coming up to our next period of focus groups, which we always deliver over the summer, and travel will be part of that because we want to keep the people involved as a continuation of the project. But not only that, I've referenced Perth Theatre Bus because we have the infrastructure in place through our own individual box office as well, but it's something as a study we really want to roll out to other organisations too, because if we think of that wider offer around capitalising on Perth Museum and how that rolls into the economic impact in the city, whether people then choose to stay and see a show and all the rest of it, it has to be a much bigger conversation. But certainly in terms of Perth and Kinross, Perth Theatre and Concert Hall, we're not seeing an impact yet.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Convener. Before we did discuss with you about gaming, etc., trying to get, did you do a wee thing with the school and ask anything about that and take it on further? And the one thing I'd like to ask you is, why didn't you book Taylor Swift and solve all our problems, right?
Sadly, I'm not a Swiftie, though that is no comment on her talent or music. So I have actually been looking into the gaming side of things. We've not spoken to the schools yet, simply because of terms. So projects like the Cool Collective and also our project with Fairview School, because of where the funding cycle fell right at the end of Christmas, it was a bit of a mad dash to get the teachers in order to get those projects up off the ground. In terms of engaging with schools, however, the other project that I mentioned was our Teenage Fan Club, which we launched in February and raised a significant amount of money for through an event which Vanessa organised just last month. So the young people are now very much taking an active voice in where they want our programming to go, and that is across the board, both in terms of our learning and engagement projects, but also the professional performances that they want to see represented on our stages. However, I was thinking about you just the other day because the RSNO are doing a gaming concert that's coming up. I don't know if you've noticed. It's not coming to Perth, but watch this space. Sadly not.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, convener. And once again, Chris, you'll need to forgive my ignorance here, and it is a question of ignorance. It suggests in your paper that you provided that you have a current workforce of 80 full-time equivalents. If I go to the pantomime at Christmas time, as I have done the last few years, oh yes, I have. I really have. There's obviously a cast of really good people there doing their best. Are these people part of your 50 full-time equivalents in the arts?
No, they're not. Historically, at Perth, they would have been when we were a repertory company, but every artist that we engage is on a freelance basis, so they have no long-term formal relationship with the organisation other than Barry, for example, who has been Dame and wrote the panto year on year, but none of the artists are employees of the organisation.
Thanks. And I wanted to pick up on just you were talking about the DJing aspect in terms of it being part of the music industry, but not necessarily something that there's a lot of qualification in. I was just wondering, I have it in the back of my head that Perth College has quite a lot of music or has an active music production course. Do you engage with, what's the extent of your engagement with the college in terms of that sort of aspect?
Yes, we have quite significant engagement with the college. I can't remember if I said to you last time that we're currently working with the college to shape their technical production degree, and we host the college's flying exams. Specifically in relation to music production, I suppose this project is almost the middle ground in terms of them actually building a portfolio of work that would potentially get them into college. The college are aware that we're doing it, and the college were approached around spaces for the students to use. But again, similarly with the young people, with Counterculture Studios offering that opportunity to actually go and work in a real live recording studio, it was too good an opportunity for them not to. But our relationships, in my opinion, with Perth UHI are very positive, and the collaborations are continuing to grow across departments. I can't remember if I said last time we were also working with Hair and Makeup to develop a stage makeup scholarship for Panto. So there are many tendrils out there, and there's a new one which we're hoping to approach them for next year. But I would say specifically in this project, we're viewing it more as a route towards that rather than a jump in.
Thank you. And on your Perthshire box office slide, I don't know if we could go back one slide. There was quite I think the development here is really exciting. It's really great to see the progress. There was an interesting quote at the bottom there. Working with Perthshire box office simplified our marketing and ticketing operation and helped us to almost triple our online ticket sales. That's from Chanson Chamber Choir. I was wondering, I don't know how many partners you've got on Perthshire box office at the moment, but are the other partners seeing that sort of same simplification, but also partnered with an increase in revenue?
Yes, particularly in relation to community partners such as the Chamber Music Society, who, no discredit to them, up until this point were predominantly selling their tickets on the door at the church and had no other option. But yes, we have received similar feedback from Perth Chamber Music Society. We've received really positive feedback from Bookmark Festival as well, who are in a similar position. And actually, it's Gail Wiley from Bookmark who's been invited to come and speak at the Creative Tech Gathering specifically on her experience, because there were other fun and games arising from the kind of financial side of things around the flooding and the fact that the festival got cancelled, and previously, had they not had the box office, they would have had to have dealt with all of that themselves. So actually we were able to step in and support them through all of that process, both financially in terms of managing that for a full festival, but also the customer communications too.
Thanks very much. And Councillor Welch.
Thank you for your presentation. I'd like to commend you on some of the sort of, really interesting and innovative initiatives, especially around accessing, bookings more easily for community groups, which I think is offers, significant benefits to groups within Perth and Kinross, and starting to focus on, this Scope 3 emission element of carbon and transport, which increasingly will become important. So well done on that. It's just in terms of slide 2, which are the sort of financials, the one that sort of jumps out a wee bit in terms of programme costs and expenditure. Is there anything particularly you want to say around that, that maybe sort of give some context in that deficit that's sitting there at the moment? Thank you.
So there are two areas where we've faced quite significant challenges around programming, one of which is a historic type of programming. It's not specific to Perth Theatre and Concert Hall, it's industry-wide, and that is particularly the theatre industry. The touring theatre industry's focus on working to guarantees, which makes it very challenging versus a box office split. So in the guarantee case, that is shows basically coming that will only take, for example, a minimum of 30k. And if the show doesn't sell, then we still have to pay up, essentially. That's part of the risk of the business, but we've really worked over the past 2 years since reopening to really get rid of guarantees, at least with the commercial promoters, with our other colleagues in the sector, such as the Lyceum, who understand. We did a guarantee with the Lyceum at the start of the subscription, but we knew it was achievable, and everybody knew it was achievable. Specifically in this case, the reason for these guarantees were for other shows that were planned that pulled out at the last minute, and we effectively were over a barrel. The other area, and for me this is a really sad reflection of the current state of affairs, is programming costs relating to our learning and engagement activities, and not new projects, but our core learning and engagement activities that have always been part of what we do. So one of the projects that we've faced the biggest challenge fundraising for is Dance for Parkinson's. We did actually get a grant in the other day, but we've essentially committed to continue running that project as part of our core funding and our core commitment, without having full funding in place. Similarly, the project which just culminated in March with Mindspace, we only received 50% of the funding required to deliver it, but the demand was more than double of the previous year. So it's been really tricky based on the competition out there for public funding at the moment.
Thank you. That helps give some context, but obviously it's an area that is from a scrutiny perspective, it's helpful to get some context, but certainly it's good to also understand some of the work you're doing to try and manage it. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm not seeing any more specific questions in the chat, so I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you for your presentations, but I did want to also turn to the issue of the written reports that you provided in terms of the annual governance statement and also the plans for transformation. So first of all, just very quickly, either chief executive or chairman from each one, key risk identified in your annual governance statement. in any order. Just dive in.
Why don't I jump in? Yep, I'll give just a very brief summary of the annual governance issues and risks identified, the key ones. You've seen the report. So one of the key statements was the organisation has a clear vision and sense of purpose, which is clearly linked to the delivery of the council's wider strategic objectives. So obviously there, one of the key guiding route maps you have is a company business plan. Our plan was a 1-year business plan that we developed last year. Unfortunately, as everybody's aware, it's been a bit of a change again this year. So in terms of our business model going forward, there's significant changes, not only in terms of the transition from bells to dewars, but there's obviously also decisions around PH2O happening in the summer. So business plan is required to be updated, taking cognizance of all these different things, and it's underway at the moment. But obviously that's a key document for us to make sure that we've got a clear route map in terms of how we go forward in the short to medium term. The next one's around organisation behaves with integrity, demonstrating strong ethical values and respecting the rule of law. So this is really just revisions and updates that we recognise that this is a key area in terms of safeguarding rights, and we've updated our policy to make sure that we've got clear guidance for staff in terms of disclosures or around any alleged wrongdoing and defined circumstances. And again, in terms of our HR policies, then what we do is we put these policies to our HR Joint Review Committee, which has staff representation to ensure that it has ownership across the company, which is vital in terms of policy development. The next one is the organisation has effective mechanisms in place to provide information and feedback to the public. And again, one of the surveys we did was customer survey just around our website and how accessible it is. It's obviously our key place for our key marketplace. It's well used, but it's identified some challenges in access of information. So again, we've developed a business case which aims to improve customer experience. It's always moving technology forwards and make sure that it can improve accuracy and functionality and strengthening the company and the company in the digital marketplace. So that's something that we have the business case there that we'll be progressing over the next few months. Last one is information is managed effectively and gathered and processed in a legally compliant way, and there's identified risks here, obviously around cybersecurity. And we all know that scam emails, malicious links, increasingly convincing going forward. We've developed staff awareness and training, but we need to further develop that and prioritise it. We're looking at progressing the Cyber Essentials Award, which is a government-backed industry-supported scheme which helps organisations protect themselves against common online threats. I think everybody's aware that threat seems to increase yearly, so it's not something that's static, and we need to make sure that we're moving with that in terms of understanding the risks and making sure that we have the right mitigations in place. Overall, in terms of good governance, then what I can say is the company is registered to complete the Good Governance Award, which is the quality standard for Scottish charities recommended by OSCA. And this award provides a clear, structured approach to assessing and improving organisation policies and procedures. And it's really just reflecting on the importance of governance and to ensure that we are proactive in terms of how we strengthen these arrangements. So we're a good bit down the award. I would say we're probably about 70% complete in terms of that. So we would hope that we will get accreditation over the course of the next quarter in relations to the Good Governance Award. Thank you.
Thanks. Just for the other two, just to clarify, I was meaning not all of the risks. Just pick out what for your organisations what you identify as the key one for the in terms of your annual governance statement.
Thank you. So the key risks for us have just been categorised into 3 areas. The first is, again, relating to our vision, direction and purpose. We have a business plan in place, but unfortunately there is a lack of clarity over the future at the moment related to the ALIO transformation review and also the outcome of our Creative Scotland multi-year funding application, which we find out the results of in October. Similarly, under a culture of continuous improvement, as touched on earlier, we have a very lean workforce. We've already made all the necessary cuts that we can to staff, but we're continuing to deliver at scale and continuing to exceed targets and expectations, but there may come a point where that is unsustainable. And again, we need clarity around staffing and staffing potential. And then the last one, and forgive me, but I felt it was really important that it should be part of the annual governance statement, and that's to do with buildings and environment. Our buildings are a significant risk. They require significant capital investment, not only in relation to ensure that they remain safe and functioning for the staff and the public, but also to ensure that we meet our environmental aims and ambitions and those of the council. Thank you.
Thank you. So like Paul, information management and compliance is a really key risk for us as an organisation, and something that we're very cited on. We hold a vast amount of personal data in terms of library membership information, but we also hold the archives material for a number of historic and more recent information, and that needs to be very carefully managed. It needs to be carefully handled, and we need to ensure that we're being compliant. We are registered with the Information Commissioner's Office for Scotland, and it is something that we are continually putting under review and managing. Cyber security is a particular risk which we're very keenly aware of, particularly in relation to the amount of data that we're holding and how we manage that data. So it's something as an organisation that is a focus of what we do, and will be a continuing focus of what we do going forward in order to mitigate the risks as much as possible. And I have to say, sitting on the council network does help that, because the council has very strong digital controls in place. The other thing for us is equality and diversity. So our communities, who we are completely embedded in, are changing. They're changing fast. How young people use language, what those mean, how we the rights and the individual needs and interests of those communities are evolving. So for us as an organisation, it is a risk not to keep up with that. It's a risk not to be aware of that, not to embed those values within what we do. So we're very much looking at things like the LGBT Youth Charter, and making sure that as an organisation that we're as inclusive as possible, that our recruitment practices are inclusive, that the way that we work with communities is as inclusive as possible, and that we reflect in our own makeup in terms of our staffing structures, the communities that we work with. Museums in particular have huge risks around their collections. Decolonising those in a post-colonial world is complex and challenging, and requires us to look at some very difficult aspects of our history, which none of us really want to confront. So that really important work, we are one of 19 Pathfinder organisations that are working with Museums and Galleries Scotland to transform how we think. And again, that sort of anti-oppression way of working, and having an organisation that is truly rooted in that values and those work is really important. And it is a key risk for us not to be, and because we will disengage for our communities if we're not. So that again is something that we take very seriously, and that we're working on a number of different fronts.
Yeah, thanks. I think it was interesting that at least two of you picked out cybersecurity as an issue in your annual governance statements, but I presume for Perth Theatre and Concert Hall and the box office, it's an issue there too. Certainly, we've got a report later on the agenda regarding cybersecurity too. Turning to I think it was specifically Mr. Blackpool, you mentioned it. Oh, carry on.
Sorry, apologies. Can I just say, and it's kind of obvious this, but Lala's been in a period of transition, uncertainty for not just the last 18 months, but since certainly the last 2 years. And I sincerely hope that at the council meeting in August, which is just sort of around the corner now, a decision can be taken in which way we go with PH2O. Either it's going to be funded, or it's not going to be funded, or it's going to be on one site, or whatever it is, because then we can start working, this team can start working very hard on a final sort of objective, because it's extremely difficult. I'm amazed how well the senior management team and all staff managed to keep going optimistically and serving the community as they do with an uncertain time, and moving from the Bells. And I've heard today how Bells isn't just a loved centre, it is has always been a very useful centre. And on a personal basis, I was sorry in this, because the way things happen, we couldn't really consider it as part of the thing going forward. That may change. So I can ask you all, please, to see if we can get a decision as practically as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that we have got that report, and that will be a key milestone that officers are working towards, to actually bring that report to not just this committee but to the full council in August. I wanted to turn, I think Mr. Glasgow, you mentioned it, to the transformation review. In the budget proposals that the ALIOs brought to us earlier in the year, there were a number of proposed savings to be made, and the council provided carryover funding so that there was the opportunity to engage with communities in the interim period between the budget, which was February-March time, and the end of this financial year in March. So, for example, the example that springs to mind was proposals around certain reductions in library provision in our rural areas. I wanted to know from each of the ALIOs how far advanced you are in with your plans for transformation to deliver the savings that the council required from you in the budget setting process. So how far have you got so far, and what plans have you got for the remainder of the year, and your level of confidence in delivering those savings? And any of you can go first, but Mr. Glasgow's throwing himself
Let
into
the cat out of the bag, so I may as well speak to it. As both Helen and Paul mentioned earlier, and it was touched on in different ways in all of our presentations, we meet regularly and have done throughout the process to explore all options. I think most encouragingly and most recently this side of the year is we've started involving wider teams and their differing expertise across the three organisations, so that they feel that they have an active voice and an active part to play in developing the business cases around proposed shared services for finance and HR, conferencing and events, facilities management and destination marketing. Those conversations are ongoing. Helen, Paul and I are also looking to do some facilitated sessions for the more difficult conversations that we need to have. And alongside that, most recently, there has been a proposal from council to potentially bring in an external member of staff to help guide us through the next stage of the process. Also, certainly from a Perth Theatre and Concert Hall point of view, also to answer your question around budget review groups and savings, the savings that we identified at budget review group and the measures that we were taking to achieve them have all been implemented as of April 2024.
If I can go next, in addition to what Chris has covered there, in terms of things like the library savings, Ailith Museum savings, the archive reductions, again, we are working on those at the moment. The libraries, we didn't start the public consultation around those processes at the start of the year, primarily because we were involved in opening the museum, and actually that just took the focus. So at the back end of the summer, sort of August time, we will be going out to communities of those libraries who are potentially at risk to talk to them about what the alternative future might look like and whether or not those communities can support that. We already have one community hub model in Cooper Angus, where the Strathmore hub have a community library in there, so we have an example that we can share with other communities. The Pitlochry library is included within the proposals around a new campus, for want of a better word, at Pitlochry High School, and that provides an alternative. And we've had some very early discussions with some of the other library providers that I'll not share at this point, just because they haven't spoken to their wider communities as yet. So that's in train. We're also working with the main users of Ailith Museum as well, to see whether or not there's an opportunity opportunity for more community involvement in delivering that. And the new configuration for opening hours at the archive, the public opening hours at the archive and our local and family history services should be something that we're looking to commence around about September, October this year. So these things are progressing, and where we can have the engagement, we obviously will have the engagement at the libraries in particular to see what opportunities we have going forward.
I'd probably only add to that. I mean, obviously, some of the key targets in terms of the ALIO consolidation was property rationalisation progress. Now, obviously, we've talked about that at length today in terms of the leisure asset review and Bell Sports Centre, so that's moving forward. Other quite significant areas around equalities and legislation and staff terms and conditions. And again, these areas have been progressing with key staff, but they're underway. I think what we can demonstrate, and hopefully everybody's had the opportunity to read through the report, is the number of collaboration initiatives that are now in place that we're working on across a whole range of areas, whether it's joint sharing or joint marketing and promotion. Obviously, there's some more significant areas there that need more work, particularly around shared services. And I think collectively across ourselves and the council, we've recognised that we probably need a bit of a support there in terms of resource moving forward to make sure that we do actually realise the expectations of the council in this area. So I think given, let's say, the other issues that probably collectively we've had to deal with over the last 6 months, I think we've made extremely positive progress in terms of how we're managing the transformational review. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I know possibly most directly affects the culture Perth in Ross, but certainly it was great to hear you talking about going out and speaking to the communities. I had a question specifically about Aelith in museum and library recently, and I did say that I imagined that your focus for the last few months would have been on opening Perth Museum, but that engagement with communities and participation will be really key. And taking up the point that you made, Mr. Cromwell, some really great examples, I think, of working across the 3 organisations to deliver similar outcomes. I think the example that's sprang off the page at me was Perth Theatre and Concert Hall doing the set dressing for the Megan Fergus exhibition in the New Art Gallery. Are there any more questions from elected members? Last chance. No? Okay. I'd like to thank the chairs and chief executives of the 3 organisations for coming along today. Thanks very much for your presentations. I realise a lot of work goes into producing those reports and doing slides, and that we've got some very exciting developments and challenging developments for the ALIOs. Look forward to inviting you back in future. I will have a discussion, I think, with the spokespersons of the scrutiny spokespeople of each grouping to decide whether that's at the next meeting or maybe in 6 months' time. But certainly we would like to have your management reporting and accounting in written format, at least at the next meeting. Councillor Allen, I think you've got a comment.
Yeah, it's just a mirror of the things that you've just said, Convener. I'd like to thank all 3 ALIOs for coming along today. They've all answered their questions in a comprehensive way. It's really good to have them here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's no other comments, then I think what I will do is I will call a recess until 11:30. That'll give members just a chance to stretch their legs and a chance for the ALIO members to depart. But thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you, members, for returning promptly. We'll now move on to item 6, the overview of activity, the interim report on the extreme weather events. This report was prepared by our strategic lead for environment and infrastructure, who's unfortunately not able to be with us today. So this is going to be introduced by Alison Williams, our Director of Economy, Place and Learning.
Apologies. Thank you, Convener. Following a number of severe weather events last October, this interim summary report provides an overview of the findings to date, actions taken and lessons learned which have been considered by this committee over the last 7 months. The latest updates on the action plan have been included in this report. The report does seek to assure elected members and the public that we remain committed to learn from what happened in October and that we are reviewing the approach that we will take to managing future events. As this committee has discussed previously, weather events are shifting in nature, intensity and frequency. After the summer recess, a more detailed report will be brought to the relevant service committee, setting out a year-round approach to severe weather resilience. As noted earlier in the committee this morning, partners will also report to this committee in September, and a final report will be presented at the October committee. Colleagues from our housing team, flooding and infrastructure teams are present here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First question is from Bailey Ahern.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction for the report. I did find the report quite lacking in detail, so I'm glad we're going to get a more detailed report later on. As I said earlier, I'm meeting at the request of residents. They've called me to a meeting with regards to the outcomes of the events, particularly on the 6th and 8th of October last year. One of the concerns I've had, and I've not seen anything written down yet, or there's nothing in this report, is with regards to what residents do in future. And I'm not talking about just flooding incidents, and I'm not just talking about the city centre, I'm talking about other events that might occur where the council are involved and there's people being moved out of their properties. Is when I was there on the day, when I got there, the first thing I got inundated from, and not just from residents, but from the emergency services as well, is who are we contacting? What's the contact number? What's happening? We don't know who to contact, because the first thing that goes when your property's flooded is your electricity and you've lost your broadband. So they've got no access to online to get information online. And unless you've got decent data on your phone, you can't get it on your phone either. And that was part of the issue that a couple of the residents have. So are we producing a document or something that's downloadable by residents that they can have in their property that they can then use to get contact details? And the emergency services, it was just unfortunate that the 2 fire engines that turned up were not from Perth and Kinross, so they weren't aware of procedures. And I think that's down obviously to the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to look at their procedures as to what happens if they're bringing outside resources in. So I think my question there is, are we going to produce information leaflets or a card that can go on a fridge or by a front door, or something they can grab in the event of an incident happening, that they have then got access to numbers, resources, who to contact, where their nearest rescue centre is, for example?
Thank you. And I think this the answer to this is from Elaine Ritchie, our strategic lead for housing and communities.
Thanks, Convener. That's a good question, Bailey Ahern. Yes, following the severe weather in October, we developed a welfare protocol, and part of that protocol, we've developed a one-page information sheet, which our staff will use when they're out and about, boots on the ground, in terms of when there has been a flooding or an incident. And it's got just basic information in terms of what to do, some immediate things, and it's following feedback from some of the residents in terms of particularly health and safety concerns, but also key contact details, and we'll arrange for that, and I'm sure it's on the website, but I'll double check to make sure that's on the website to act as an aid memoir for people as well. So it's a one-page information sheet that we have developed, and that was part of our lessons that we learned through the incident in October. So we have got that in place.
Thank you. And the health and safety was part of another question, but since you've mentioned it, because a number of the residents were getting electrocuted, and some did actually have severe electrocution sores on them, because where they were electrocuted from their legs up to their hands. And also there was an incident where further up, and they were concerned about the level of water coming up, was somebody that required care at home on life machine, so their life depended on the machines in their property, and had we lost electricity in that area for the whole road, that might have caused a problem as well. So, and you said in your response there that officers will have a sheet, but I think it needs to go out to residents as well, because you may not always get officers there in time.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and we've done that as part of our follow-up work, but we can even save it on the website as well. And some of the areas that have flooded, we've now got them as alerts on our system, so we can be a bit more proactive before it happens to go out in terms of giving that information and advice also.
Thank you. Next question is Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you to the officers as well. We know now that we'll have a full response and a full report by October. Are we confident that if something similar should happen similarly, let's just say in July, flooding is not just a winter concern, that we are prepared and we will respond in a different way? Thank you.
Mr. Skeet.
Hi there, Councillor. Certainly, even over the summer, we have staff on call now 24/7, both from a roads maintenance partnership concerns, our parking and civil contingencies team, as well as others. So I'm fairly confident that we've got all-round cover should it be required.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Convener. I think everybody will be encouraged that we're making progress in this report. But can I ask about our general approach to flooding? With regard to places who are normally places get flooded through flash floods, it's almost a routine thing. And what happens is you get residents getting water come into their houses and gardens because the drains are blocked. So the council are really good at coming out and clearing the drains, but we seem to have no programme to clear out drains in areas that are prone to flooding. And I'm wondering if a more routine drain maintenance procedure will be part of this review of dealing with extreme weather events.
Mr. Skeen.
Again, it's not really my area, it's more a roads maintenance partnership, but there is currently a schedule for gully maintenance. There is sometimes a little confusion also around whether a drain's blocked or whether it's the actual sewer overtopping. So if the gully can't empty into the actual sewer network, or the sewer network is over capacity, it'll then back up through the drains, which will then either block the gully or it will certainly appear that it may be the case. So there is a schedule in place, but it would be probably better for our road maintenance partnership colleagues to give a further explanation into what that is. But yeah, I think certainly that there needs to be a distinction whether it's the drain being blocked by the gully or whether it's the actual sewer overtopping.
Can I come back on that? I fully appreciate that. I understand exactly what happens with combined systems, but very often it's found that, and it happened in Kinross just a few weeks ago when with severe rain, that the drains just weren't coping because they were needing cleaned out, and they were cleaned out, and that's made a difference. But I think there is an issue there with general maintenance of road drains in areas that are prone to surface water flooding. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Robertson. The next, I think what we'll maybe do is take that question. I know that we don't, unfortunately, have roads maintenance partnership. Oh, we do. I beg your pardon. Mr. Scotcher from the roads maintenance partnership. Do you want to come in?
The gullies will be in flood susceptible areas will be on are currently on a schedule that get cleaned more often than your standard gullies that are in areas that don't flood. Unfortunately, with the sheer number of gullies around Perth and Kinross and the resources we have, we won't be able to just go out and keep these gullies cleaned. I think they're on an annual list and on a list so they can get done reactively as well. A lot of our gullies do get cleaned reactively. I will take a note and speak to the roads maintenance officer and see what the actual plan is with the gullies in the flood susceptible area, with a knowing storm event coming.
Thank you, and I think Ms Williams, you want to come in as well.
Yeah, thank you, convener. There is a piece of proactive work to be done here with partners, which is the flash flooding in terms of predictive models as to where we have areas of concern, because as we described, the weather events are changing and the intensity changes. So there's a bit of mapping to be done. And part of the work that needs to go into the full year-round resilience plan that needs to be reported back on should include that predictive models where we've got them. So our partners are really important in helping us work on those, and therefore then we would need to prioritise which gullies are more likely to have flash flooding events, and therefore we can be ahead of the game on some of these things in future.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much, convener. I have probably a couple of questions. Number one would be, if you were one of these residents in Perth that were flooded, it's been a long time now. Confidence simply hasn't returned to these people at all. And personally, I would say that until mechanism comes along and we do something with our gates mechanically, human error will always be there. And I think that these people not have confidence that it's not going to happen again. I'm sorry, but that's what does happen. As far as what Councillor Robertson was talking about, I've been batting on about this for months and months. It's obvious that there was a ditch system put out there throughout the country. It was there for a reason. They didn't just dig these ditches and say, well, we'll just let them fill up. It's obvious that the whole system throughout Perth and Kinross and Scotland is choked. And until we get together and clear them all, it doesn't matter if you empty your drains, because the ditches are full, the overflow is going to come over, and each time it rains, they're going to get choked. So until we look at it from climate change, which they say is happening, and I think climate change is part of it, but I think the amount of rain that's coming down has got nowhere to go. And it's got to flood more and more people. So until there's a different, and I know there's a report coming, but as far as going back again to the people who are flooded badly, each one of them must be sitting there thinking, what do I do? Because their house is no longer of any value. They've got no guarantees this is not going to happen again. And if we can get some money somehow or other from some source, and let's get the whole system under some sort of mechanical sort of system, right? Okay, so that you don't need to rely on somebody forgetting or a group not appearing. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. I know that one of the things that we were was explained to us in on the tour that members had of the flood defence system was the option to look at permanently closing more of the gates. So I know that your question is wider than that, but in terms of the sort of localised issue, permanently closing more of the gates on the flood defence scheme in the city in order to reduce the time it takes to go round and reduce the resource required to get all of the gates closed quickly. Next question, and of course, sorry, in relation to your point about ditches, that is within the resources required. That is a political matter for us in terms of providing the necessary budget to the staff. So, you know, I'm sure we can all have discussions about that offline in our political groupings and come to a consensus around that. Councillor Councillor Forbes, I think I'll bring you in for a comment just now, please.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I thought there were still some more questions, but happy to go ahead with a very quick comment. I think the point that Councillor Robertson made about cleaning out these ditches regularly, I think is very well made. And I know we're talking about specifically the issue in Perth, but let's not forget, excuse me, let's not forget Invergowrie, where there was a fair number of people who are still out of their homes due to flooding. And we hear about gully cleaning. I think I certainly do at least a couple of times a week, and I'm sure most of us will as well. And this is, as you said, it's all about budget. And at our last budget, we proposed some extra money to clear out more gullies, and we didn't get the support from anyone else in the council to do that. But perhaps if we put it in our budget again next year, we'll be able to get some support on that. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And Councillor, sorry, I thought you were trying to come in with a comment on the discussion at the time, but Councillor Allen, I'll go to you for your next question.
Thank you, Convener. It probably follows on from both your own comment and the one that Councillor Forbes has just made. I know that we've got budget constraints. We all understand that. I'd just like to ask the Roads Partnership, really, from their experience, and they're the professionals in this area, should we be doing more in this area, and should we be looking at that budget setting? Thank you.
I would have to, I would have to defer that question to Stuart Diall. Going back, he deals with the budgets set for us. I know that in the year that I've been here, the budget for flood maintenance on all the schemes has increased significantly and will continue doing so as like flood schemes begin to age. So definitely there is a question as to the budget and how much we would need to keep these schemes to a good operational level.
Mrs. Mailer, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think simply in sort of in the absence, it's Stuart Dall's not on the call, unfortunately, today, but I think just to advise committee and councillors that through the normal budget setting process, when services and strategic leads across the organisation identify particular additional demands within service areas, then budget pressures will be put forward by officers through the normal budget proposals and the normal budget process, and that will indeed happen. I think, as we've already explained, we've undertaken a full review of our emergency resilience, emergency planning response. This is an area due to climate change where we're seeing increased pressures, and it will be an area that will continue to be kept under review. And if there are any particular pressures, we will either manage those in year within service, or we will come and bring that through the normal budget process.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Claire, as well. It was primarily, my question was about the gully cleaning and the schedules that we have. I think we've got a schedule that's something along the lines of we should be doing one once every 18 months in the very least. It's something like that. My question about the professionalism and their experience was more along the lines of, should we be doing more? Should we have a different way of dealing with this? Thank you. It was about gullies.
Mrs. Bull.
Thank you very much for that question. And I think, as we described, Mr. Dawes not here today, but I think we will take that as an action to have a look and a review. And in terms of part of the year-round resilience plan that we need to put forward, if that indicates there are budget pressures, then we'll need to raise that, as we said, through the channels that we would do normally.
Thanks. If I could follow up with a question on that then. Action 1 from our or proposed action 1 from the report that we first had at committee was around, I'm going to quote here, reporting on resource requirements to support year-round resilience, and that was due to go to EIED, which would now be economy and infrastructure, I think, by this month. Where are we with that report?
I think that the report is suggesting it's August in this document.
Okay, thanks. Okay, are there any more questions or comments from members? Switch back to the chat. Councillor Smith, you're first.
Thank you, Convener, again. My comment would simply be the people that were flooded last year, and there were people in my constituency who were flooded, have seen absolutely nothing done. And then they will look to the winter coming up and the first time of rain comes along and be extremely worried. So I'm very sorry, but I'm getting told and I've been witnessing it and I have not seen anything that can help. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Welch wanted to come in with a comment.
Thank you, convener. It is interesting to hear the various sort of questions and comments. My understanding is there is a significant focus now on gully cleaning with clear parameters around frequency of visits and reporting of visits. I think it is very important to understand that the significant impact that climate change appears to be happening with the both frequency and intensity of weather events, and ultimately this then means it's a much more complex problem which will involve multiple parties. While clearing ditches is obviously going to be part of that, as somebody who lives in a rural ward and travels into Perth sometimes during times of significant weather events, it really appalls me at times to see the quantities of soil and detritus washed onto roads and blocking ditches and blocking gullies, which the public purse has to then seek to remedy. I make this point in terms of it. There are multiple organisations, landowners, agencies involved that need to help solve this problem, and that should be a continuing focus. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm just realising that I forgot to ask the question that I'd pre-written down, so I'll come to me before I come to you, Councillor Robertson, with your next comment. My question was, when we were having the original discussions around this, we were looking at ways of supporting the teams that do the flood defence gates with more people trained to do it. And I know that I think we've got more staff trained, but specifically the question at the time was whether the community could be involved. In terms of, if there were smaller or lighter gates, whether they could be closed. When we were on the tour of the flood defences, we were told that that wasn't possible for insurance reasons. Is that the case? And are we not able to involve either, constituted community groups or groups under a banner of community councils? Or is the insurance an absolute block on doing this, or is it a hurdle that we need to find a creative way to get around? I don't know whether who that's a question for.
It's a block.
Okay, and alternatively, then, are there no other public sector agencies who could assist with that? Should we need the support?
I think in terms of that, certainly what the first focus has been to just sort of enhance the capacity internally with the staffing resource that we've got. That has happened. Those of you that were on the tour will actually see the sheer size of the gates and I suppose the manual effort that it takes to actually close them. So there are real challenges there in terms of, I think, the technical ability and indeed the risks. But we will obviously explore sort of every other sort of, opportunity going forward. So we'll pick that up with the team and indeed Fraser on his return.
Thank you very much. Councillor Robertson, you had a question.
Sorry, I have a comment. But my comment would be, and I'm going back to what I said previously and what Councillor Forbes and has said too, that it's about the drains. I'm aware that the Roads Maintenance Partnership do identify areas where there is a flooding risk and they do try to keep these gullies cleared. But as someone who's tried to get other areas added to the list that's included in that, and been told that they don't have the resources to do it, I think that identifies the problem. And we really do need to look next year at the budget to try and give our officers the resources to help protect other areas that are prone to flooding because of our drains can't keep up with the capacity of water falling. So I think it's up to the political groups in the council to get together and identify how much more money would be needed and try and have that included in next year's budget. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other comments or questions, we'll draw that to a close. I know that we are expecting to have the other partners involved, as I mentioned earlier, along to the next committee. I was hoping that we could have a discussion with committee members, maybe just in preparation for that, about what sort of areas we wanted to cover. But I think we will arrange that, given the time, we will arrange that offline if that's acceptable to the other group spokespeople. We'll arrange that well in advance of them coming, so that you know when we can prepare them for the questions, lines of questioning that we might ask. If that's all, then can we accept that update and note that we will be getting a further update and further investigations at the next meeting? Agreed? Okay, we've got 2 items left on the public agenda and 1 on the private, and the vice convener is going to lead the discussion on those 3 items.
Great, thank you very much. So starting then with the item 7, which is the annual governance statement, I'd like to hand over to Lisa Simpson to introduce that report, please.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Councillors, before you is the draft annual governance statement, which the Council is obliged to prepare to be attached to the draft annual accounts, which will be going to audit at the end of the month. These obviously will then form part of the final accounts, which will be produced and agreed later and signed off later in the year. The process for assurance is designed to check and test what our governance framework and our system of internal control is. This is done through a process, various processes. We rely on obviously any external checks and inspections and audits. We also do an extensive process of self-evaluation across all of the service teams in terms of the internal controls that are within their area. And there is also the professional and technical officers who deal with the key governance areas, who give their own professional assurance around the system of internal controls as far as it pertains to them. So therefore, as well as service management teams looking at their own area, there will be assurance given by me in my capacity as monitoring officer and also his capacity as the Senior Information Risk Officer. There will be assurance from the Section 95 officer in terms of financial stewardship. There will be assurance in terms of our workforce management and our procurement functionality. There will be assurance from the Data Protection Officer, and there will be assurance from the Information Risk and Records Management Officer, and finally the internal audit opinion from our Chief Internal Auditor. I would also advise you that we also have to look at the governance arrangements, or be assured as to the governance arrangements in terms of the other parties who are part of our group of accounts. You'll have heard about the annual governance position from the ALIOs this morning, and they too have gone through that process of self-evaluation and certification of assurance. And in terms of the Tayside Valuation Joint Board, Tayside Contracts and Perth and Kinross Integration Joint Board, they are obliged to produce their own annual governance statement. So we simply rely on their statement and take assurance from that. In terms of the process, the internal self-evaluation process is also internally scrutinised and checked by the Policy and Governance Group, where there's a bit of peer review and challenge. And I'm happy to report that as far as we're concerned, the assessment process, you can be assured that the governance framework is adequate and effective, and that our system of internal control is robust. I would like to extend my thanks to strategic leads in their service management teams and all the key governance officers who have provided assurance, and also the Policy and Governance Group, but more particularly to my right-hand woman who has led the preparation for this, which is Jackie Clark, our Chief Internal Auditor, to whom I am extremely grateful, and both of us are here and happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for the introduction. I suspect this is a paper where I'll have to pad by asking one of my own questions while you all prepare your own questions to address to the officers. So my question is, Section 4.5 of the report talks about, it references that a number of key and experienced officers at service manager and team leader level have left the organisation either through retirement or to take up other opportunities. I wanted to ask a question about how do we mitigate for that? Is there going to be some renewed effort on things like succession planning to ensure that the impact of that is minimised in the future, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Yes, one of the reasons why, the other thing that I did want to say is that there's not a specific action plan attached to this annual governance statement, and that is primarily because most of the key areas that we've identified as areas for improvement or potential risks are already wrapped up in either other strategic plans or other areas of transformation and change. In terms of that particular issue around the loss of skills, knowledge and experience, that is being picked up in terms of the leadership review, which of course we're now going into phase 2. You'll also be aware that the people and culture strategy is coming to FNR for approval at the next meeting today. So that also is picking up on areas around workforce planning, succession planning and key risks around that. So that is already in train and either work already in progress or work that will be undertaken. And also as part of the risk management within service management teams in terms of their own operational business, that will be addressed. And can I just say, councillors, do not feel obliged to contrive any hard questions for me.
Thank you. Yes, I was reassured to see, I think, 3 mentions of succession planning in the report we have before us later for those of us who are on finance and resources. So thank you. Unless there are any questions, then I think that concludes that item. Just I'll pause in case there's anyone wishing to make comment. Okay. We're asked to scrutinise and comment on the draft annual governance statement and note the assurance provided and to the adequacy and effectiveness of the council's governance arrangements. Are we happy to do that, committee? Thank you. Right, we'll proceed on to the next item, which is the item 8, the Perth and Kinross Health and Social Care Partnership Clinical and Care Governance Exception Report. That will be introduced by Mr. Kenny Ogilvie. And just before I hand over to him, just to mention that this committee and the council's role in this area is specifically around adult social work and social care. So if we can, it will be good if we keep our questioning and comments to those areas, because the report is a little bit broader, because the Health and Social Care Partnership obviously covers NHS work as well. But if we can keep our focus on adult social work and social care, that will be appreciated. Mr. Ogilvie, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. This report is an exception report as opposed to the full report from the Care and Professional Governance Forum from the Health and Social Care Partnership. And the one risk that is new is the risk regarding occupational therapy staffing across the PRI site, which is now classed as a red risk. There are a number of issues that have contributed towards this situation. There were a couple of, 2 fixed term posts that have come to an end, and that they were basically put in place using one-off funding that we received during the pandemic. And also there are posts that are currently being held to give the possibility of transferring staff from another service which is being discontinued. That said, that will obviously be time limited, and that should be resolved in the fairly near future. What we are doing is the Chief Officer of the Health and Social Care Partnership has commissioned a review across the whole of our allied health professional provision across the partnership, and that includes occupational therapy. And that review is commencing shortly, and we've identified an experienced physiotherapist to lead that review. In the interim, this risk has been mitigated by by centralising the OT resource at PRI, and they are allocating work on a daily basis dependent on the level of risk for the people involved. In terms of wider risks regarding OT, we have had a red risk for quite a while in terms of our community OT service for assessments for OT aids and adaptations. We have been hit by a number of people resigning there. There are vacancies that are being advertised, but again, that will be included in the wider review of the allied health professional resource across the partnership, and we're confident that review will lead to some efficiencies that will create a bit of extra capacity, and that will then place us in a better position to identify any gaps that still exist in the service, and we can focus our minds on how to address them.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Ogilvie. We have a few questions coming through, so Councillor Allen, please lead us into the questioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I hope I'm wrong, but my reading of this, it's a short statement, I get that, but are we in a position of crisis? And if we are, what can we do to help?
It's not a crisis. It's not a crisis. It certainly is far from ideal. Again, when we're fully staffed, we're able to have OTs aligned to individual wards up at PRI. But as I said in my summary at the start, we're no longer in a position to do that. So we're having to centralise the resource and allocate OTs depending on the level of need and the level of risk across PRI.
Can you give us an idea of the level of vacancy and the problem as it is? Thank you.
My understanding is that there are 10 whole-time equivalent vacancies. That's across the whole partnership, though. That's not just for PRI. And as I said in my summary as well, the situation has been exacerbated because a couple of vacancies have been held for the possible transfer of staff coming in from another service. But that should be resolved imminently. When I say imminently, I mean in the next week or two rather than the next month or two.
And just really to finish that off, thank you for your answers, by the way. That's good. I'm noticing that you've got currently 400 people waiting for help here. How are we going to manage that?
Yeah, the 400 people, that's relating to the community waiting list for OT aids and adaptations. And again, that is managed by reviewing the waiting list or the priority list on an ongoing basis. And, where possible, we allocate people an occupational therapist in terms of how long they've been on the list, but we also review it in terms of need. And people waiting are prioritised into one of three priorities. I mean, for example, if you're needing an either adaptation for a critical daily activity such as toileting, your class is a priority one. And, we have timescales to respond to priority ones, and we are currently meeting those response times. So, the people at the higher end are meeting their the target in terms of getting their equipment out within the appropriate timescale. It's more your priority threes, which are more people with needing support, for example, with bathing aids, etc. They're the ones that are waiting long and we're not meeting our timescales for that.
Thank you. And then Councillor Forbes next.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Just following up a little bit on the last question, is the issue here about money? Are these occupational therapists going off to work somewhere else because they're getting more money, or is there simply a shortage of occupational therapists across the country?
It's not so much about money. There is a national shortage of occupational therapists. That said, in Perth and Kinross, when we advertise permanent full-time posts, we do manage to fill them. It's more if there are posts that aren't full-time or they're fixed-term funding, then it is more of a struggle. And like I say, there are exceptional circumstances at play here because we've had to hold some posts pending the potential transfer of workers from another service. That said, the reason, as I said in my summary as well, that the Chief Officer has initiated a full review of the HP service is, we just need to sense check. There's been a massive increase in demand in recent years. As people know, with the ageing population, we need to make sure we are deploying our resources effectively and as efficiently as possible. Once we're clear of that, we can then identify any gap, if there is any, and work out how we fill that gap.
Thank you. And then Councillor Robertson next, please.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Councillor Forbes asked the question I was going to ask.
Thank you. And then Bailey Ahern.
Thanks very much. I was quite surprised when I seen this. I've got a couple of people at the moment which I'm trying to deal with who are looking for reassessment, either for blue badge, for benefits, and they've been delayed because they're now a requirement to get OT assessments done in that part of that process. These two in particular have lifelong conditions. Nothing's changed for them. Their blue badges and their benefits have now stopped because it's gone past the date. And I questioned why there was a requirement for the OT assessment on a lifelong condition. And if we've now got a problem where we've got 10 spaces, why are we delaying these people in it getting their blue badges, getting their benefits? Because we've got a lack of OT. These are people with long life conditions. We should be just going, okay, we need to reassess the waiting list. And if we've got people on that waiting list that could be passed forward because their conditions haven't changed, why are we delaying it?
Again, we have dedicated OTs who assess for blue badges, and there has been changes to the national criteria for blue badges as well. I mean, again, having a lifelong condition in itself doesn't necessarily mean you're eligible for a blue badge. And again, we do need to make sure the blue badges are being targeted at people that require them the most. So again, I can't obviously go into discuss individual situations, but there will be valid reasons for requesting a reassessment from an OT.
So what you're saying is because we've got a lack of OT, these people are just going to have to suffer, who now can't get out of their houses because they haven't been able to get access to blue badges or benefits.
No, that's not what I'm saying. As far as I'm aware, there are no significant delays in assessments for blue badges.
Okay, we'll perhaps draw a line there, and if you could let Mr. Ogilvie know of the details, perhaps Bailey ahead. Thank you. So there being no further questions intimated in the chat, we have a comment from Councillor Robertson. Please proceed, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Vice Convener. The shortage of OTs is a real difficult problem, and it's creating great distress for many people living in our communities who cannot get their homes modified, and it's affecting their quality of life and ability to lead a less pain-free life. And I know of a number of cases in this area that people have waited months and months and months and months, even though they're on the priority list, to get to see an occupational therapist. So I really think that we need to get a grip of this, because it's having a really serious effect on the quality of life of many people, and it just seems incredible that we've got to this stage. And that's even before once an OT arrives and assesses the person, then we've got to try and find the resources to put the modifications to the property in. So I found this whole report very, very both upsetting and disappointing. And this is not a criticism of Mr. Ogilvie, but it's just a very, very sad state of affairs. Thank you.
Okay, there being no further comments then, I'll thank Mr. Ogilvie for both attending committee today and for your and your team's work that's done on this. There is some assurance in the report that things are improving, and I think reflecting on what I said about focusing our questions on adult social work and adult social care, it became clear through the discourse there that actually occupational therapy, even though it doesn't seem related, does have obviously that profound link because it helps people to live their lives more independently, obviously. So thank you for bringing that information to our attention. Thank you. Are we happy to note the report? Thank you. And then there'll be a bit of a Morecambe and Wise thing, because I have to hand to the convener to close the meeting and move into private session, then he'll hand back to me for cyber security. So convener.
Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the annual review of cybersecurity. It is recommended that we hear this item in private, but we do have to formally agree that. Are we content to hear the item in private? Thank you very much. I'll therefore close this section of the public meeting, and we'll go offline, and we'll reconvene immediately for the private session. Thank you very much for your attendance today.